Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So this is a continuation of my Black History Month series. For this video, I'm going to highlight the contributions of Charles Hamilton Houston. This brother is very important in our history. And I don't think that he receives the kind of attention that he deserves. So that's the reason why I'm highlighting his contribution in this video. Every day when I go to the office, I see Charles Hamilton Houston's portrait. And by his portrait, I see a quote from him that says that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society, meaning that a lawyer can either contribute to society and help change society, or a lawyer can just be a parasite feeding on society. And this brother was a social engineer. He used the law to bring about fundamental change in this society. He laid the foundation for future generations to litigate in these civil rights cases. He laid the foundation for a Thurgood Marshall and other important civil rights attorneys. So I'm going to go through his history here as noted in Wikipedia and provide my commentary as we go along. So Charles Hamilton Houston was born in Washington, D.C. to a middle-class family. He was born in 1895, and his father was a prominent attorney in D.C. and he practiced law for over 4 decades. And the thing that's so extraordinary about his father is that his father was a son of a former slave. So despite his background as a son of a former slave, he would go on to become an attorney. That's an extraordinary accomplishment for his father. You know, his father was an attorney under those circumstances. I mean, this is during Jim Crow. This is not too long after slavery. That is a tremendous accomplishment. So Charles Hamilton Houston had living and breathing examples of excellence, of Black excellence in his household. So it was no coincidence that this brother, Charles Hamilton Houston, would go on to become one of the greatest attorneys ever. He attended Dunbar High School, and he would later go on to study at Amherst College. Beginning in 1911, he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society, and he graduated valedictorian in 1915. He was the only Black student in his class, and he graduated at the top of his class. Now, this brother didn't use his education to go off somewhere and just make some money or anything like that. He decided to give back to his community, so he returned to D.C. and he taught English at Howard University. And as you all know, Howard is a Black college. Later on, the brother would join the U.S. Army as an officer during World War I. He served the military. He served in the, in the Army. And at the time, the military was segregated. He served as first lieutenant in the U.S. infantry at Fort Meade, Maryland. And he would write this, in describing his experience as a soldier in the Army. He said this. He said, "The hate and scorn showered on us Negro officers by our fellow Americans convinced me that there was no sense in my dying for a world ruled by them. I made up my mind that if I got through this war, I would study law and use my time fighting for men who could not strike back." So this is extraordinary. I mean, here you have a brother, like so many Black people, fighting for a country that really didn't fight for them, fighting for a country that humiliated them and segregated them. Here they are fighting for the country, and they're being segregated and they're being victims of hatred and, just discrimination. And, this whole experience that this brother described, just reminds me of something that Chuck D said in his song, Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos. He said, "I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it. It said they were suckers. They wanted me for their army or whatever. Picture me giving a damn. I said never." And, those words just embody, the attitude of people who have woke up from the deep slumber. You know, here you are fighting in a war for a country that doesn't even care about you, fighting in a war for a country that doesn't even give you basic civil and human rights. What sense does it make fighting for a country, you know, fighting for democracy and this and that for other people when you don't even have democracy here in this land? You know, at this time, you know, you had Jim Crow going on where black people were forced to be in the colored section, you know, discriminated against, humiliated and stuff like that. Even in the army, where you're taking up arms to defend your country, where you're putting your very life and safety on the line, even there, black people were discriminated against and humiliated. And under those circumstances, it makes no sense for black people to be in the army, to be in any kind of armed forces for the United States. So I feel what this brother, Charles Hamilton Houston, said in that quote. So once he returned to the United States in 1919, he entered Harvard Law School. He would go on to be the first black student elected to the editorial board of Harvard Law Review, and he graduated cum laude. Now, Harvard, of course, is one of the best law schools in the country, and I'm sure at that time it was probably the best, if it's not the best right now. And to get on law review is a major accomplishment at any law school. You know, it's highly competitive. And for this brother to be elected to Harvard Law Review just tells you about his work ethic. It tells you about his skills. It tells you about his nature, you know, the fact that he is a determined and ambitious person, you know, with the necessary skills to excel. Because I'm sure at that time, this is 1919, I'm sure that people didn't want him on that board just because of the color of his skin, but this brother's skills demanded that he be on that board. A major accomplishment. This brother was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Um, he went on to study at the University of Madrid, and later he was admitted to the bar and he joined his father's practice. And at the time, the American Bar Association refused to admit African American attorneys. So African American attorneys went on to create their own bar association, the National Bar Association. And Charles Hamilton Houston founded the Washington, D.C. affiliate of the National Bar Association, and that affiliate is the Washington Bar Association. So you had his brother building an institution, building an organization, building an affiliate of the National Bar Association. So this brother didn't use his law degree to work at some big fancy white law firm or to fit in with white people. This brother used his education to give back to his community. He went on to serve as vice dean and then dean of Howard University Law School. Um, and he helped rebuild or to build up Howard University's program, the law school program. He extended it from being a part-time program to becoming a full-time program. He helped get it accredited by the Association of American Law Schools and the American Bar Association. He trained a whole generation of black attorneys, and one of those attorneys included Thurgood Marshall, who would go on to head the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and also who would go on to become a U.S. Justice, a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. So after Houston left Howard, you know, he served as the first special counsel to the NAACP. And in that capacity, he got involved in litigation against race discrimination, you know, against housing discrimination, against segregated schools and other important matters. You know, he paved the way for Brown versus the Board of Education. He was involved in many cases attacking segregation. So what he did is he helped build the case, proving that separate but equal was not equal. he would document the difference between black educational facilities and white educational facilities. And basically, through litigation, he forced the system to recognize the separate but equal was not equal. He forced different school systems to provide equal funding and equal facilities for black schools. So he said, well, if we're going to have this separate but equal doctrine, let's make sure that they actually live up to that doctrine and make sure that they provide equal pay for black teachers compared to white teachers. Let's make sure that they have equal facilities for black students, that they have the same facilities like that they have for white students. And here's a quote that's cited in this Wikipedia article, and it just talks about Charles Hamilton Houston's strategy. It says this: when he attacked the separate but equal theory, his real thought behind it was, all right, if you want it separate but equal, I'll make it so expensive for it to be separate that you will have to abandon your separateness. And so that was the reason he started demanding equalization of salaries for teachers, equal facilities in schools, and all of that. So through this litigation, he helped prove the separate but equal was not equal, and he laid the groundwork for the case Brown versus the Board of Education. And one thing that he would do is he would take photographs of these different facilities and compare them. He would take photographs of the black facilities and compare them to the white facilities. And it was a night and day difference, highlighting the inequality in this society. If it wasn't for Thurgood Marshall, if it wasn't for Charles Hamilton Houston, there would be no Thurgood Marshall. There would be no Brown versus the Board of Education case because he laid the groundwork for it, proving the separate but equal was not equal. And also, in terms of the litigation, like for instance in Missouri, he found that they did not have a black law school there. He found that in Missouri, they excluded blacks from attending the state university law school. So basically, he said, well, that doesn't live up to the separate but equal doctrine because there's no comparable law school for black students in the state. So he fought separate but equal case by case, establishing how it was basically unequal. So I'm going to read through a couple of his cases that he was involved in. So he was involved in ending restrictive housing covenants. And for instance, that's like a covenant in a deed that basically says, well, this house can't be sold to black people and this and that. They used to actually do that. They would have deeds that say that this house cannot be sold or transferred to a black person. So he fought, against those kind of racially restrictive covenants. And you all can read the history in this case, in this article in Wikipedia. So I'm going to cite some of the cases real quick. In Corrigan versus Buckley, they found that restrictions, in Corrigan versus Buckley, they found that such restrictions were the acts of individuals and beyond the reach of constitutional protections. And Charles Hamilton Houston would overturn that ruling in the case of Shelley versus Kramer. The court ruled that the judicial enforcement of private rights constitutes states' action for the purposes of the 14th Amendment. And, that basically struck down those racially restrictive covenants and deeds. So, this finally points out how Charles Hamilton Houston's use of sociological materials and cases laid the groundwork for the approach that was used in Brown versus the Board of Education. So this brother laid the foundation for the civil rights movement. He deserves our respect and, he deserves honor.